You're watching LEX 18 News, State of the Commonwealth.
Welcome back. There will be more in-person voting locations this election than the June primary in Kentucky, but most counties will still have less than in past years. Fayette County's plan from Clerk Don Blevins has 6 voting precincts, and while that is more than the 1 location we had back in June, Secretary Michael Adams says that he's concerned about that number still. When I spoke with Blevins earlier this week, he told me there's nothing else he can really do.
Poor Lexington, we are just having bad luck. Our civic center's under construction. The football field's not available to us this time because of SEC football. Normally we use tons of schools and churches. I can't use the schools because they're back in session and it would crush them to shut down for 3 weeks. Can't use churches because of security issues. So really we're down to the last, dregs of locations that we can use. Thankfully, the libraries have stepped up and become a partner. BCTC has given me a location, so between those and the city, we've managed to cobble together 6 locations.
Blevins says the county is built to handle 85% turnout, but he's counting on only 30% to vote in person, while the majority would vote absentee.
So that translates to somewhere between 120 and 150,000 mailed ballots. We're only sitting at somewhere between 75 and 80,000 requested so far, so I really need that number to rise rapidly.
Even with a high number of absentee ballots requested, Blevins says we'll have a good idea of how the Fayette County races will shape out by election night.
Under this current emergency regulation, county clerks will have to report their partial results on election night. That will include everything we've processed out here up until that day, early voting results, as well as election day results. All those totals will go out into the election night reporting system at the Secretary of State's website. Should know a pretty good chunk of it. It'll just depend on how many people hold on to their mail-in ballots to the last minute. That's the only thing that will be lagging.
Secretary Adams also told me that he does have veto power of any county's plan if he does not approve it. As of this taping, Fayette County's is still under review. Now, as for absentee ballots, if you did request one, you can actually start submitting them now. There are a couple ways to turn them in. Mail ballots must be postmarked by Election Day, November 3rd, and received by November 6th. Drop boxes will also be available to return mail-in ballots, and you may see them around Lexington now. We have information about drop box and early voting locations up on our website, lex18.com. As Secretary of State in the mid-90s, Bob Babbage oversaw Kentucky's elections. Now, as LEX 18's political analyst who keeps a close eye on things in Frankfort, he gives high marks to the work of Secretary Adams and Governor Beshear to expand voting options in a pandemic, noting the higher than usual turnout back in June, despite everything going on.
And part of that was driven, I think, by concerns for politics, but also just concern of the times. People were worried, they were anxious about the economy, they were anxious about how we stay well and how to help their neighbor. So they took it out in civic action, which is great for the process. Look, when I was Secretary of State, we did everything under the sun to try to get people to register and vote. Now, because of this extraordinary, difficult, challenging year, voting has become not only easier, but more of an obligation because people are talking about it and persuading people to participate.
Now, across the nation, there has been a push for all eligible voters to get out and vote. You can't log on to social media without seeing reminders. There are 519,000 elected positions in the United States. In addition to the presidential election, 1/3 of senators are up for re-election, as well as every seat in the House of Representatives. Lexington community activist Divine Karama is walking across the state this week to raise awareness about voting. He says his walk is about 401 miles, not only to represent the number of years since slavery was first instituted in the United States, but also the distance from Pikeville to Paducah.
So my thing is, regardless of what side, you are voting on, we just want to get everybody out to vote because this is one of the, in my opinion, this is one of the few instances in our democracy where the people have the chance to speak. A lot of the issues in our country right now, they're exacerbated by elected officials. So when people complain, you can't complain if you don't go and use your voice.
Karama also recently released a poem about the absentee ballot process. Well, both nonpartisan groups and politically affiliated figures across the state are working overtime to help people better understand the changes to voting in the age of a pandemic. LX18's Mike Valenti has been talking to a few of them. He joins us now with more. Mike?
Yeah, that's right, Conroy. Chances are you've already been inundated with political ads, messages about registering to vote, and misinformation online about concerns surrounding mail-in voting. President Donald Trump has been one of the loudest voices amplifying the theories that election by mail is rife with fraud. There's little data to support this. And Trey Watson, a Kentucky Republican who's managed campaigns and now runs a political consulting firm, says he doesn't agree with the president's attacks on absentee ballots. But he also doesn't approve of states automatically sending mail ballots to voters. Kentucky is not one of those states. Only 9 states plus Washington, D.C. do that, and they only send them to voters who are already registered. Watson says he begrudgingly embraced the plan put forth by Secretary Michael Adams and Governor Beshear, given the concerns the pandemic has caused. But going forward, he says absentee ballots in the mail should be granted for specific valid excuses, though he did concede there should be more of those reasons made available. But his main sticking point was this: he does not want expanded no-excuse early in-person voting to become permanent.
And I think you're going to be a situation where people are going to vote before candidates public vetting has ended, and you're going to run into situations where people regret choices that they've made before election day comes. I think that there's an opportunity to expand voting hours, and I actually have a solution for it. I've talked to some legislators about it. I think that we saw in Louisville and Fayette County that they successfully used a single polling place, and you'll see in the general election limited polling places. I think you could easily have regular polling hours at most polling precincts and then have limited precincts open after 6 p.m.
Of course, our primary mission is voter rights. And so having time to vote early is more convenient for you is better.
That was Jennifer Jackson, the chair of voter services for the League of Women Voters Kentucky. And you could hear there she disagrees with Watson. She hopes no excuse early voting becomes the norm in Kentucky. But interestingly, while she agrees with Watson that it would be ideal to extend voting hours on Election Day, she says that could pose some logistical challenges in terms of hiring and paying more poll workers. But turning to this election, her organization is focused on cutting through the noise and providing voters with the right information they need to be able to cast their vote. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization formed in 1920. Of course, that's the year the 19th Amendment was ratified. Its mission is to increase voter education and expand voter access. But during the pandemic, they've had to take a lot of their voter registration and education forums online. And 100 years since women first gained the right to vote, Jackson says there's a lot more work to do.
The majority of people are not voting. If we want to have a radical revolution in who gets elected and having people hear our voice, we need to get mobilized. 50 or 60% of people who are not voting, we need to get them to the polls. If you say your vote doesn't matter, the way to guarantee that your vote doesn't matter is not to vote. If you don't show up and you don't vote, your voice doesn't, you're not going to get heard. So participating is how you get heard. And so don't be a naysayer before you've even done it.
And speaking of participation, there's a subset of voters who will be heard for the first time in a long time this November. You remember back in December of last year, after Governor Andy Beshear took office, he issued an executive order restoring voting rights to Kentuckians with past felony convictions. According to the governor's office, more than 190,000 Kentuckians were able to regain the right to vote. The ACLU has that number at 175,000. But even though their voting rights were automatically restored, these Kentuckians are still required to register if they want to take part in this election. The ACLU of Kentucky has launched a campaign to try to make sure this happens. The advocacy team has started a text banking program, sending 12,000 texts in just 2 hours last week. Another 65,000 people were reached through direct mail. But while voting advocates call the executive order a significant step, they note this still leaves behind more than 65,000 Kentuckians. And the advocacy director for ACLU Kentucky says the governor and the legislature should work together to extend these rights to those convicted of violent and sexual-related felonies if they've completed their sentences.
What we want to make sure that we're doing is really building relationships with folks who have been impacted and folks who have not had their voting rights restored, which we feel is likely going to disproportionately disenfranchise. Even this great executive order, we still think it's likely that more Black Kentuckians are being left out than white Kentuckians. You deserve this. You deserve to have your voting rights. The government shouldn't be so big that they can take away your voting rights so easily. That's not fair.
And it's important to note, if you or someone you know think you may be covered under the governor's executive order and you want to check, you can visit civilrightsrestoration.ky.gov or go to the ACLU's website. Conroy, back to you.
Thanks, Mike. And to view more of those conversations with these groups, you can head to our website, lex18.com. State of the Commonwealth. We'll be right back.